Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will now hear what is called in the program an interlude plenary speech with the topic, the American perspective. It is given by a very important person, Ambassador Nicholas Burns, who has many friends in Greece, I was told. He is the Roy and Barbara Goodman Family Professor of the Practice of Diplomacy and International Relations at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He's faculty chair of the Future of Diplomacy project and the project on Europe and the transatlantic relationship. He's also director of the Aspen Strategy Group and a senior counselor at the Cohen Group, and from 2014 to 2016 he was a member of Secretary of State John Kerry's Foreign Affairs Policy Board at the US Department of State. He served in the United States Foreign Service for 27 years until his retirement in April 2008. He was Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs from 2005 to 2008. We're all ready to listen to your web-based speech, Ambassador. I hope you can see us and hear us. If you are agreeable, we will have 10 minutes of questions after your speech. Are you okay with that?
I'm more than okay. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Shall I begin?
Okay, right. I move over before you start. What I want to say.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First, let me say what a pleasure it is to be speaking with you this morning. This afternoon, I should say, Athens time. And I'm very sorry I couldn't be with you in person. I had planned to do that. I had hoped to be in Athena over the weekend. I want to thank the Anitas Pospos for the invitation that was sent to me, but I had teaching obligations this morning at Harvard that prevented me from traveling to Athens. In fact, I just left my class. We had class this morning, and so I'm happy to speak to you by Skype. Sorry, I can't be in Athens this morning. I just wanted to say a few words about the relationship between the United States and Europe, and also the United States and Greece. And then let's have a dialogue. I'd be happy to have a dialogue with all of you and answer any questions you have, but also hear your opinions on these issues. I start from the presumption that the relationship between the United States and Greece is still vital for both sides. 3 data points. Europe, the European Union countries are the largest trade partner of the United States, not China, not India, not Japan. Europe's the largest investor in the American economy. It has been for many decades. It continues. And third, and I'm a former U.S. ambassador to NATO, so prize this, we have more treaty allies and military allies in Europe, 27 European countries, including Greece, along with Canada, more allies than any other part of the world. And so I know that a lot of Americans tend to think that the Asia-Pacific is going to be the arena of greatest interest to the United States. It's very important. But right now, if you look at our basic national interests, economic and military, you have to say that Europe is still the most important part of the world for the United States. That's point one. Point two, I think the United States has had a remarkably consistent policy towards Europe since the late 1940s. Certainly the support for the coal and steel community by President Truman, President Eisenhower, support for the Treaty of Rome in 1957, support for the common market in the 1960s and 70s, support for the single market and for the euro and for Maastricht in the early 1990s, support for the development of this extraordinary institution, the European Union, over 70 years has been a very consistent priority of American foreign policy, and we have always considered Europe to be a friend and a strategic partner. There are elements of competition between the two largest global economies. Europe is the largest global economy. The United States is the second economy in the world. We're going to compete, but I think over 6 or 7 decades, we've learned how to compete strategically. We've learned not to let trade and investment differences overcome what is truly valuable and that's the strategic link across the Atlantic. I say this because I'm going to be critical of President Trump in some ways. I think by branding the European Union as a strategic foe or adversary of the United States, that's what he said when he was in Brussels in July of this year, by launching a trade war against the European Union and justifying it on national security grounds. No president prior to President Trump has ever done anything like this. And I think it's very damaging and injurious to the relationship. I cannot imagine that a successor to President Trump in 2020 or 2024 would repeat this, because we're certainly going to be stronger on the global stage if we are strategically united, both with the European Commission in Brussels, the major governments, Germany, and Britain, still the EU, but not Italy and other countries. So that's an important point, I think, the Americans need to reflect on. We have so many priorities with Europe. We look at the situation that you are facing, the migrant crisis, which has been such a struggle for Greece, and Greece has had so much responsibility imposed on it. And I would say from an American perspective, not enough support by some of the larger European economies for Greece as it deals with a massive influx over the last 3 years of migrants and refugees in the eastern Aegean Sea. But certainly that crisis, which has destabilized European politics, the United States ought to be very sympathetic and try to help Europe through that crisis. The rise of anti-democratic populists, and we Americans do not want to see Marine Le Pen succeed. We should not want to see Alternative for Deutschland succeed. We should not want to see Geert Wilders in the Netherlands succeed. We certainly should not want to see the success of Viktor Orban in Hungary, or the Polish right-wing government, or the Liga portion of the Italian government, because these are political leaders who don't believe what has been at the foundation of Europe for 75 years now, and that is human rights, the rule of law, democracy, freedom, all the things that have united us with Europe in the past. So I think a lot of us in the United States want to make sure that we're supporting the continuation of democratic governance in Europe. I say that I visited 6 European countries in the last 3 months on 3 separate trips, and I was really impressed by the degree to which Europeans are concerned about this threat from within of the anti-democratic populists. You know, we hear stories that Steve Bannon, formerly the ideological guru of the Trump administration, is trying to organize these anti-democratic parties in Europe to contest the European parliamentary elections in the spring of 2019. Here's a threat to Europe where the United States needs to be on the right side of the issue. And I fear that President Trump is not. I see President Trump being publicly critical of Chancellor Merkel, of Prime Minister Theresa May, and you all saw how critical, I thought, rude he was to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the Quebec G7 summit. And then you see President Trump reaching out to the Polish government, who was just in the Oval Office this week. And President Trump not at all critical of the democratic failures of the Polish government. President Trump supporting Viktor Orban in Hungary. President Trump supporting the anti-democratic extreme right portions of the Italian coalition government. This is a very disturbing development. We're going to have to argue these issues out on our side of the Atlantic. We have our midterm elections coming up in just 6 weeks' time. But it concerns me that the United States is not supporting Europe the way we should. The other issue where I think the United States could do more to help Europe is on the issue of Russian assertiveness. We've seen over the last 10 years the Putin government invade Georgia and divide it, invade, occupy, and then annex Crimea, steal it from Ukraine and annex it to the Russian Federation. And the Russians, of course, are still in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine with Russian troops. And this is an overt measure by Russia to subvert some of the smaller countries to the south and west of the Russian Federation. It's a power move by the Russian authorities. And I think it's incumbent upon the United States to stand with the Eastern European countries and support them. President Trump has decided, and I think this is good, to provide lethal munitions to the Ukrainian government. These are really defensive weapons to make it a fair fight. I think that's positive. But we need to see more from President Trump in supporting NATO, in making sure that we are deterring further Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. NATO has moved a battalion of troops each into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. That is positive. But President Trump, and you saw this at the Helsinki summit that he had with President Putin in July, has failed to stand up to Putin, has failed to press Putin on his territorial aggression in Eastern Europe, and failed to stand up to Putin on Russia's attempt to destabilize the American elections. We know the Russians interfered through an asymmetric cyber offensive into our elections in 2016. There has to be a stronger response from the United States. That's a big domestic issue here in the United States. And even the Republican Party, senators and members of the House of Representatives, are very upset, very concerned that President Trump has been so weak in his response to President Putin. And so that's another issue where the United States and Europe need to recenter our relationship. The last thing I'd say, and now I'm going to stop and look forward to your comments and your questions, is over the long term, the next 30 to 40 years, the United States and Europe are going to have, I think, identical interests in winning two battles with the authoritarian powers, Russia and China. The first is the battle of technological superiority. If you talk to technologists, we're entering the digital age, the global digital economy, and the race for technological supremacy in artificial intelligence, in biotechnology, which is a major strength of our economy here in Boston, Massachusetts, and in quantum computing, is not only going to have major repercussions for the global economy, for economic power, but also for military power. Because the Chinese and the Americans and many other countries are going to weaponize some of these technologies to create the 21st century military technologies that will make a difference in the balance of military power in the world. There is a possibility that the Chinese might be able to outpace the United States in research and development in quantum computing and also in artificial intelligence. They could possibly, not assuredly, but possibly, become the dominant military power because of these new technologies. That argues the United States and Europe to be investing money together, billions of euro and dollars, in research and development for our universities, for our government research labs, in the private sector, so that we can compete in this 21st century platform. That's the battle of technology that I think unites the European Union countries and the United States of America. And the second battle, if you will, is the battle of ideas. Russia and China are authoritarian powers. They don't believe in the democratic systems or the ideals of democracy that were born in Greece 2,500 years ago, invented by the Greek people. They believe in state capitalism, but also a strong, rigid state that effectively controls their own populations. We need to have the self-confidence in Europe and the United States that our system is worthy, that our system is the superior system, by that I mean our ideals, that are part of the basis of the European Union, as well as the United States, as well as Canada. And that's freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom to think what you want to think, freedom of religion, free movement of peoples. These are the essential rights that the Hellenic Charter talked about in 1941 when Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt got together to think about why we were going to resist the fascist powers in the Second World War. They're at the center of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. They're at the center of the United Nations Charter. And there is a battle of ideas being contested in the world today between the democracies and the authoritarian powers. So there's a lot to think about as we think about Europe and the United States and our relationship. Now, just say one final thing. I've been following events in Greece closely because I'm a Philhellene. I have a great admiration for Greece and Greek culture and Greek history. And I've been watching our great American ambassador in Athens, Jeff Pyatt. And I know that the United States had a major presence at the Thessaloniki Fair just in the last couple of weeks up in the northern part of Greece. I know that the USS Whitney, an American naval vessel, was in the port of Thessaloniki. And I'm really happy to say, I think, as I've followed the U.S.-Greece relationship over the last 30 years, it may be at its most positive point right now. And I say that as someone, I was ambassador to Greece between 1997 and 2001. We had our struggles in those days. We had a difference over the war in Kosovo. There was a deeply seated belief in the left-wing part of the Greek political system that the United States was a neo-imperial negative influence on Greece. I never believed that, but that was the charge. 17 November, the Greek terrorist group was killing Greek politicians and business people, and that killed 5 members of the American embassy staff between 1975 and 1991. Those days are behind us. I think the relationship between Greece and the United States is as good as it's ever been. And I want to congratulate all of the Greeks in attendance today, and certainly my friend Ambassador Jeff Pyatt, for having really produced a very good, positive relationship. So Leonidas, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm very sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm happy to continue this discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your insightful remarks and for a very welcome view of the transatlantic dimension, the relationship of the US to Europe. Very welcome indeed, particularly given your criticism. I don't want to mention anybody, but the criticism was also very welcome. Okay, now I open the floor to questions. Would you please ask your questions? Yes, please. You're the first one. Do you want, Mr. Kosovo, you want to start? You can, sure, and then you.
I would like to thank you for this intervention in our conference. It is a long time since we haven't heard the real, clear American voice.
Yes.
And a plea for democracy and liberty. Thank you again.
Και εμείς ευχαριστούμε, Leonidas. Και εμείς ευχαριστούμε. Ευχαριστώ.
Okay.
Would you like me to respond, or is there another question? Or?
Yes. Well,
It was just, no. It was just a comment, I guess, right?
well,
I thanked, in my broken Greek, I thanked Leonidas, I think it was Leonidas, for his comment and his friendship, and look forward to see you all on my next trip there. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay.
well, I'm Evanthis Vassiliou. I'm teaching history at the University of Athens. I would also like to thank you for this presentation, enlightened and reassuring as always, as you have always been during your term in Athens. You told us that transatlantic relationship is one of the most pivotal aspects of US power in the contemporary world. In fact, this relationship is one of the aspects that ensures that the United States will remain the largest power in the globe for the foreseeable future. Now, it is very strange and unusual to see the leading power of the system to appear to be anti-systemic. It seems to me as a strategic mistake. I would first like your comment on that. And the second thing, what do you think, if anything, can Europe do to help its valuable American partner? What could enlightened America expect from us? What can we do?
Well, Professor, thank you very much for your question and your comments. What can Europe do? Please be patient with us. We're going through a fundamental debate here in the United States about who we are at home, but also the role we play in the world. And I'm someone who, for my entire diplomatic career, of course, I served both Republican and Democratic presidents. We in the U.S. government, when we serve, we are non-political, apolitical. We don't favor either political party, but I'm now a private citizen. I'm a professor here at Harvard, and my view is that I think President Trump is taking us in the wrong direction. He has the United States in retreat from its global responsibilities. We've said no to the Paris Climate Change Accord, no to the UN Human Rights Commission, no to the Iran nuclear deal. You know, President Trump talks about you, the European Union, as some kind of adversary, strategic competitor. That's never the way we've thought. That's not the way most Americans think about Europe. President Trump has undermined our alliances like NATO, and it's a fundamental foundation of American power, our alliances. He's dismantled the global trading system. He said no to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He said no to the proposed US-EU free trade agreement. He has renegotiated NAFTA in a way that might really hurt the economic relations among Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And he hasn't even stood up for democratic rights around the world in the way that I suggested. So our debate here in the United States is to, I hope, see a Democratic victory in our midterm elections, and to have someone run against him in 2020 who would offer a more open, supportive, traditional American relationship with Europe and with our other allies around the world. I say that, and this is going to sound a little bit arrogant, and I hope it doesn't, but as you said at the beginning, the United States is still the strongest world power. We have the largest global economy. I think we have the most innovative global economy. You see that right here. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have one of the leading, if not the leading, biotechnology centers in the world right here in Cambridge in terms of the billions in capital investment into the biotech sector here. We have tremendous military power, and we retain that power in a comparative military advantage over China and Russia. But part of that power is working with NATO and working with our East Asian allies, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and our defense partners in South and Southeast Asia. We have certainly a lot of political influence. So I want to see the United States be a good citizen of the world, be active in the world, and not retreat. And I fear we're retreating under Donald Trump.
Okay.
So thank you for your question.
Thank you very much for these very clear words. I have to intervene as a moderator because I'm very, very happy to hear that from somebody in the United States. Okay, there's another question. Effie?
Ambassador Professor Burns, last time we met was in 2007 at the brilliant conference organized by the Office of the Historian at the State Department. So a lot has changed since then. What worries me is the retreat of American power, the neo-isolationism we see permeating American foreign policy. And since we're in Athens, I find it particularly problematic in what is happening in the Middle East. I feel that America is abrogating its role as the leader of the West.
Absolutely.
If you could comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to talk with you again. You know, I think on the question of isolationism, for those of you who know the U.S. well, we've always had, since the 18th century, part of our national DNA has been an isolationist gene. You know, every generation of Americans has struggled from Jefferson's time to Trump's time with this question, how do we participate in the world? There's a portion of our public that doesn't want to see us with using our military or economic power around the world. They really want to see us focus most of our attention at home. There's part of our population, maybe I'm part of this, who believes that we have no alternative. We've got to be active in the world given the power we have in the world. I would reassure you with this, while President Trump is in some ways an isolationist, but in other ways a unilateralist, he's kind of an interesting combination of the two. In the public opinion polls, and they've been very consistent, especially over the last 20 months since President Trump came into power, the American people support NATO, support our relationship with Europe, support trade, support immigration into our country, support taking in refugees. It's very interesting. Democrats and Republicans support these traditional aspects of American power. We haven't said a lot this morning about immigration and refugees, but there, we've been normally taking in about 70 to 80,000 refugees per year. We're the leading acceptor of refugees in the world. We know how to do this. We're an immigrant society. We're multiracial in the United States. We're multi-ethnic. And so we can take in people from all around the world. President Trump is going to slash refugee admittance in the United States from about 80,000 under President Obama in 2016 to maybe 20 or 21,000 this year. That's I think, a very unwise reduction of refugee admittance, because there are over 63 million people in the world today who are either refugees or internally displaced people. That's the greatest number of people since 1945. And I know Greece understands this because you have so much pressure in the Eastern Aegean Islands from refugee flows from the Middle East and other parts of the region. So I hope we're going to return to a more normal America. It'll probably take a change of government here in 2020 or 2024, but we're going to argue this, that's in the self-interest of the United States to be outward looking. Your question on the Middle East is really relevant for your conference, because just in the last couple of months, the U.S. government has completely changed our position in the Israeli-Palestinian equation. We've moved our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We have not done that since 1948. We didn't want to show favoritism before the issue of who owns Jerusalem was decided. We decided that we would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, but we didn't recognize it as the capital of a future Palestinian state. We've cut off all U.S. support for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. This is the major agency that takes care of Palestinian refugees. We have now ended all American economic support bilateral for the Palestinians. I think this is a great mistake. We're not being true to our commitment to help Palestinians stay alive and to hopefully become part of a new Middle East when a Palestinian state is formed. It's one-sided, and if the Trump administration thinks that by taking all economic aid away from the Palestinians, we're going to force Palestinian leaders to the negotiating table with Israel, I think the reverse will probably happen. So I think that our policy has been entirely misguided. In the Palestinian-Israeli situation, on Syria, just say one thing, I hope that the U.S. is going to stay involved diplomatically in Syria, in this vicious civil war, and to try to prevent a total domination by Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and the Syrian government. The European Union, the Sunni Arab states, and the United States need to be working together to argue for a transition in Syria, hopefully in the next year or two away from war, that won't be entirely prejudicial on behalf of the Assad government. So thank you for your question.
Okay. Any further questions? Yes?
Hi, Ambassador Burns. Steve Hawking warned us about overpopulation and artificial intelligence, and as you say, the Chinese are advancing fast. So how can we ethically and physically intervene? Greece is a poor country, and we often feel things are done to us. Do you feel the little fish of Greece can take on the big fish, like Russia, China, etc.?
Well, I think the great, if I can say this, I know there are a lot of Greeks present, and I know that you've gone through a very difficult period with the Troika during the Greek debt crisis of 2010, 11, 12, 13. But certainly Greece is going to be a more influential country staying inside the EU and keeping its place in the EU. I just saw during my time there the benefits in terms of infrastructure improvement in Athens and Thessaloniki, the subway systems, the airports, the Ignatia Highway, the bridges from Patras. You had a tremendous influx of modernization of Greece's infrastructure, largely provided by the citizens, your fellow citizens in the EU. And that's a great thing for Greece. I happen to think that the European powers made a mistake in imposing such harsh terms on Greece during the debt crisis. I agree with President Obama that Greece needs debt relief and will continue to need debt relief. And so I hope that the Europeans are going to look at Greece and understand, particularly the younger generation of Greeks in their 20s and 30s, they're inheriting this unbelievably large debt burden for the rest of your lives. And for you to be a productive society and to rebuild your own economy and confidence, and to have young Greeks come back to Greece to live and work, debt relief is going to have to be part of that. So I hope the Europeans will have that inspiration. And then the last point gets to the heart of your question: what can Greeks do? What can Americans do? Germans, French, Spaniards? In a way, Walter Isaacson, who's an American author who wrote the big book on Steve Jobs and wrote a recent book about Leonardo da Vinci, he says that what made the West great, Europe, Canada, the United States, over the last century, is that we believed in the innovation triangle. We believed that our governments should be spending research and development money on future technologies, and that our private sector, of course, would be the heart of it. Think in my country of Apple and Google and Facebook and Amazon. Most of the R&D in AI is going to come out of those companies. But there's a third leg of this triangle: universities. I happen to be in one right now in this building, Harvard. MIT is just a mile down Massachusetts Avenue here in Cambridge. What really made us great were the ideas coming out of our universities in Europe, the United States, Japan, that were then taken by the private sector to build the great modern tech companies. If we're in a race with China for technological advancement in artificial intelligence, in quantum computing, in biotechnology, each leg of that triangle, the government spending, the private sector spending, and the university R&D, has to be there. And right now, in the United States at least, the vast majority of our capital investment in these future technologies is in California and Massachusetts and in the big tech companies. It's not in our universities. And so I hope that our government's going to be smart over the long term and expand the R&D funding, research and development funding for our universities. The same thing has to happen in Europe, because Europe has extraordinary engineering, science, and math expertise and talent, and you've got to bring it out, and we've got to coalesce in this so that our free democratic societies are advancing in technology the way that China is going to. I don't mean to put everything into competitive terms, but that's how the Chinese think of this. They think of this as a competition. So we need to be organized in the West to make sure that our citizens have the tools to be able to compete. And that's putting a lot more money into science and technology. Here at Harvard, we're building a new engineering school right behind me, across the Charles River. We're putting a lot more money into the sciences because we believe that any great university has to be very strong in the sciences in the future. So I think that's something that is a challenge that we share on both sides of the Atlantic. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the audience? Yes? Professor Privilakis?
Hi, we have met many years ago in Ohrid. And
We did, Professor. Nice to see you.
And you probably know my son Nicholas. We share the anxiety about the transatlantic relationship. And this is a major danger. It's a problem from your side, but it is becoming a problem for our side, the European side. I live in France, so it's more like a French than a Greek problem at this moment. We have inherited many networks of transatlantic friendship and exchange, but they seem to have gotten old and a bit outmoded. And maybe we should try to renew in order to keep the dialogue on and the exchange on. We have to do some effort because I think it's a major danger, and in a certain sense, the fact that there is such a wealth of networks inherited from the past is also a handicap because they are old and people seem to perceive them as outmoded. So our meeting has subtitled Agendas of Reform. Maybe this is an issue, how to renew and to revigorate all this network, all this tissue of networks inherited from the past. Thank you.
Well, Professor, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I really like the way you framed it. I would just ask you again, be patient with us. We're not going to disavow our alliance and friendships with Europe. We're going to argue that point here in the United States. But I think we will win the argument. The American people support NATO and the European Union by large numbers in our public opinion polls. But in the meantime, as you say, one way to cope with this crisis across the Atlantic, largely produced by our government, I have to say, by our president, I have to say, is that we need to keep the bridges sturdy, and the Hellenic American Union is one of them. And Anatolia College and the American University in Thessaloniki is a second one. And the American College of Greece is a third. And all of the fraternal organizations between Greek Americans and Greeks in your country, it's critical. And then you expand that away from the U.S.-Greece, beyond the U.S.-Greece relationship to Europe as a whole. This is a time for our students. This is a time for our business people and politicians to be making sure that those lines of communication are open. I really think that is important at this time. We have just created here at Harvard a new program on Europe and the transatlantic relationship, of which I'm the faculty chair, designed to do exactly this: expand the number of courses here at Harvard on Europe, expand the number of European professors and politicians and business leaders coming to talk to our students. We're going to continue that in the coming years. And I think there's a commitment in our country, an understanding we've got to keep the lines open to Europe as our president engages in a trade war, minimizes the importance of NATO, these things that I find truly objectionable.
Thank you. I think we can stop now, and we don't want to overextend your patience. Thank you very much all for your excellent talk and also for graciously answering our questions. Thank you very much, Professor Ambassador Burns.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. I wish you all the best. Leonidas, thank you again for making this possible today. Look forward to seeing you in the future. Sina Lava. Thank you.